So, how much woodworking equipment can you fit into a two-car garage? Guess there's only one way to find out.
Hey guys, I'm Shane from Timber Biscuit Woodworks, and welcome to my garage workshop. Now, it's been a few years since my last shop tour, and there's been a ton of additions since then. So without further ado, let's get into it.
My shop space is 21 feet by 22 feet, or just over 450 square feet, and it's pretty packed with tools, supplies, and storage. Today I want to cover what I like and dislike about the current state of the shop, as well as how I plan to keep improving things moving forward. So with that being said, let's get started with what is at the heart of any wood shop, at the table saw. My table saw is a SawStop professional model, and I went with the 240 volt, 3 horsepower version. I've used a few table saws over my career, but this one by far has been the best experience. The saw is just over 500 pounds, sits on an easy to move mobile base, and is built like a tank. That added weight dampens the sound coming out of the saw and gives me a very stable workspace, which I think is the biggest problem with lighter cabinet saws. As far as adjustments go, the saw is quite reliable in that once I lock in my settings, I can be confident that they're going to stay there, which to me is incredibly important since there's nothing worse than thinking you're making a 46.5 degree miter only to find out that it was 46.25 and your joint has gaps. Though I will admit it was nice back in the day when I could just blame the saw and not myself for those oversights. And speaking of miters, the miter slots, saw blade, and fence were easy to align with one another and share the same dead-on confidence as the other adjustments. I also added a system from woodpeckers to give me reliable stops on the saw, which helps a lot with repeatable cuts. Obviously, the safety features that come along with the saw stop are an added bonus, though I'll be honest, I hope to never have to experience them. Knock on wood. From there, we're over to the outfeed table, which I feel is just an extension of my table saw, considering without it, I'd probably only be able to cut down 4-foot boards. The miter slots are extended 18 inches into the table to allow for ample space for my assortment of table saw sleds. My outfeed table has 6 drawers and 2 large cabinets that store a ton of tools, though I will admit they're not as organized as I wish they were. That being said, I'm going to show you guys everything in the shop today, so you'll get to experience a bit of the chaos behind the scenes. I'm also going to add an overlay to projects like this one that I have build videos for. This way, if you're interested, you can check them out later. So the top of my outfeed/assembly table is melamine, which makes for easy cleanup during messy glue-ups. I also overhung the table from the lower cabinet a few inches to allow for easy clamp positioning to the tabletop. Below the work surface, I store a few of my larger, lesser used tools, as well as my compressor, allowing me to free up more horizontal space for project clutter. And yes, the miter saw is under there too. Moving over to the corner of the shop, we have some vertical lumber storage. Here I store any boards that are long enough to keep, but not long enough to store long term. I have that storage on the other side of the shop, but we'll get there momentarily. This space is more for the grab and go type of boards that I'm going to need access to relatively quickly, whether that be for an upcoming project or offcuts that may come off recent builds. Here I just used a few links of chain and hooks to keep the boards from falling into my workspace. Now onto one of the unsung heroes of the shop, the bandsaw. I think a lot of people focus on their table saw, but having a quality bandsaw is just as important. I personally use my bandsaw just as frequently, if not more frequently, than my table saw. So here I have the Grizzly 17-inch 2 horsepower model. I've added the upgraded fence for resawing and the mobile base so I can reposition it as needed. And that comes in super handy for ripping down rough cut lumber. The top portion of the saw kind of becomes a catch-all for all my magnetized jigs and holders, but it keeps things at arm's length, so it works for me. The motor holds all my extra blades, which I try to keep on hand in case one happens to break in the process, which is also another reason to wear your brown pants in the shop. Out your right side window, you'll see my layout tool wall. I updated it from a French cleat system a few years back, and honestly, I couldn't be happier with that decision. This design is a lot less bulky, and it can fit a lot more tools nested this way. One thing I found is that if you invest in quality layout tools early, you're going to end up thanking yourself later, because there's going to be a lot fewer mistakes in your work. And if you're looking for a place to get started, I would suggest starting with a quality combination square and double square. From there, you can expand your collection as you go. But I will say that once you do make the leap into those quality tools, there's no going back. So consider yourself warned. Right below the tool wall, I have another tool cabinet which I designed to be open and accessible. Horizontal space in any shop is high-end real estate, so I leave this space open for parts and tools that I need quick access to. The 4 drawers across the top store some of my more regularly used items like attachments for my tools, drill bits, and sandpaper, but the lower portion consists of open adjustable shelving. Now, don't get me wrong, I love the clean look of closed cabinets, but there are specific items that I want to be able to get to quickly, and this is their home. Again, this may not appear to be the most organized space, but as my wife could probably vouch, I could tell you exactly which cubby stores each item from across the house, even if she can't understand a word of it by the time it reaches her. Climbing back up the wall, I have my hand tool till, which stores a good chunk of my hand tool collection. The thought process here is similar to the lower cabinet in that I want to have quick access to these tools, so I store them out in the open. And I'm not going to lie to you, the fact that they look good displayed also makes this an ideal storage solution. My block plane, number 4 smoother, and number 7 joiner are the 3 planes I reach for most frequently, but the router plane and shoulder plane are a pair that I couldn't live without. When it comes to hand saws, I tend to favor the Japanese style more than the Western, but both have their advantages. My chisel collection is pretty well rounded with a combination of bench chisels and mortising chisels, and as far as brands go, I tend to stick with Susan, Veritas, and Lee Nielsen for my hand tools as I feel their quality is top notch. Moving right along, next we have the PantoRouter. This is one of those tools that you don't realize you want or need until you have one. The PantoRouter is a versatile tool that allows for really precise joinery. It takes a little bit of getting used to, but once it becomes part of your normal workflow, you'll likely find tons of uses for it. From cleaning up joinery with a flush trim bit to cutting super snug dovetails and everything in between. This is probably one of my favorite tools to use in the shop, and I'm constantly finding new ways to integrate it into my workflow. Below the table, I have some scrap storage nestled where I can, and then my dust extractor and separator bin to help me save on those costly vacuum bags. Directly above that is my clamp storage rack, which consists of storage for parallel, F-style, and a few other clamp styles. They say a woodworker can never have too many clamps, and with that said, I'm curious to know how many you actually have in your shop. So let me know in the comments below. And as always, if you start your comment with any number of clamps, I'll reply to you guys first because I know you're paying attention. You can probably tell that my favorite clamps to use are parallel clamps, but they're pretty pricey. Pipe clamps can work just as well, and I keep a handful of longer ones around for larger glue-ups. From there, we have the Mushroom Kingdom sound dampeners to help remove some of that shop echo and add a bit of fun to the workspace. Moving from the back wall to right field, we have more shop storage solutions. This wall has the more long-term lumber storage that I spoke about earlier. And I have each shelf numbered so that I can track what species I have and at what dimensions on a spreadsheet. I used to wing it when it came to this sort of thing, but I found that tracking materials can save you a lot in the long run. The cabinets below store many of my consumables like glues, epoxies, wood fillers, tape, etc. Basically anything I need to stick things to other things and then clean it up. For the time being, this is also where I store my random orbit sanders and other sanding equipment. But I have a sanding station design that I'm working on, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on that update. Among the other things that are stored here are clamping squares, jigs, and other odds and ends. The upper cabinets do sit higher on the wall to give me plenty of space to use the joiner below. From there, let's drop it to the floor where I keep my roller stands tucked away. These are great for supporting larger workpieces that are too long or too heavy for me to support solely on my tabletops. Next we have what is quite possibly the most important tool to any furniture maker, and that's a large joiner. And I call it one of the most important tools because obviously it'd be very difficult to build furniture properly from boards that aren't perfectly flat. That's where this 8-inch parallelogram joiner from Grizzly shines. The 72-inch long tabletop makes it perfect for joining large boards, and I've had great success cutting clean edges on boards up to 8 feet with it. The helical cutter head cuts through even the toughest stocks like butter and leaves me with nearly finished ready surfaces. Though I will admit I love a hand planed surface more, this just gets me there a lot faster. And by now you've probably noticed that I have a lot of my milling machines on the outside of my shop while the center caters more to the building and assembly side. I feel like this layout works really well for my workflow and allows for the best optimization of my space. Pro tip, if you're struggling to hold on to those boards you're joining, try out a pair of flooring floats. They really stick well to the surface of lumber and don't slip like the foam paddles do. So if the table saw is the heart of any workshop, then the bench is its soul. And my bench is a split top Rubo made from cherry and walnut. It's hard to explain how versatile a quality workbench is, but I'll do my best. Before this bench, I had an MDF tabletop and there was a lot of vibration within that work surface whenever I was chiseling with hand tools or trying to get precise cuts with hand saws. This bench weighs about 300 or so pounds, so vibration is pretty non-existent, which means cleaner, more precise cuts overall. Multiple clamping positions also allow you to orient your workpiece in any way you see fit, so getting to those tough angles is a lot easier. Honestly, this might be one of the best things I've ever built from the perspective of being able to build more things. So as we get one last look at the bench, if you're enjoying your tour as well as the tips, give this video a like and share. It really helps the video out, and I greatly appreciate your support. Over in the corner, I have a fireproof bin for oily rags nestled by my smaller sheet goods storage. This again is another corner where these workpieces aren't full sheets of ply, but are offcuts that can be used for jigs, sleds, or sometimes in a pinch for current projects. Next to that I have my drum sander, with whom I have a very love-hate relationship. This drum sander is underpowered and quite frankly a pain in the ass to use. However, when I do need a drum sander, it saves me a lot of time from having to thickness pieces down by hand. I just wish that I could handle more material than a 32nd at a time. To your starboard side, you'll find my dust collector, which is a mini Gorilla by Oneida. I've been using this dust collector for about 3 years now, and while I've been overall satisfied with this machine, I do have plans to get a hardline system in the near future. But if you don't mind hot swapping tools with hose connectors, this is an excellent solution. And in my small shop, it's actually been working great. I'm just getting lazy in my middle age. The separator system works well, though on days when I'm milling a ton of lumber, I can clog up the filter pretty quickly, which halts production a bit. To speed up the process, I've attached a small vibrating motor from Amazon to help knock out the fine particle buildup when cleaning it out. From there we have one of the newer additions to the shop, which is the 15-inch 3-horsepower planer from Grizzly. This, like the joiner, features a helical cutter head that can chew through even the densest of stocks. Prior to this, I had a DeWalt 735 planer, and when milling material like hard maple, it left me with a ton of tear out, but this machine has no problem slicing through. I added a digital depth gauge to help me dial in the thickness of my boards, and that's really sped up my milling process. I also have the planer sitting on a mobile base, so I can center it in the shop and mill material up to 8 feet. The larger infeed and outfeed tables mean I don't have to fuss with my roller stands as frequently, and after a day or so of battling with the settings to get them dialed in, I haven't had to mess with anything to get super smooth boards with minimal, if any, snipe. Next we're onto the tools that I get more questions about than any other, and that is my table saw sleds. These sleds are the auto scale miter sleds from Woodpeckers. They have a ton of features for dialing in the proper length and are built like tanks. I'll leave a link to them in the description for anyone who wants to check them out. I've owned a ton of shop-made sleds and none have compared to how well these are built. Dialing in the sleds is pretty straightforward, and since they automatically adjust lengthwise for any miter, you don't have to worry about changing the settings like you do on other miter gauges. With interchangeable sacrificial fences, not only are they incredibly accurate, but they're also incredibly easy to use. Smarter, not harder. Speaking of things that are smarter than me, next up we have the CNC, which I still have an ongoing battle with. Now don't get me wrong, this X-Carve from Invincibles is a reasonably priced small shop model that will get the job done most of the time. My biggest issue isn't with the build quality or the size, it has more to do with the hiccups I often see with the software. For that reason, many times you'll see me cut templates from cheaper 1/4-inch plywood versus my actual workpiece, because if there's a mistake there, I can toss the template and try again without ruining the project. One day I hope to fully trust my CNC to do the work I'm asking of it, but until then, the war wages on. I do, however, love the table it sits on, which can easily support the large footprint without swaying during the carving process. It also allows me more storage space for plywood scraps that fit well for future templates and jigs. Moving right along, we have my T111 wall, which stores my guide rails, dado stack, traditional miter gauge, and a few hand tools. I like this paneling solution because it allows me to attach holders wherever I want using a few fasteners. I'd love to expand this to more places in the shop, but at this point, it's a bit late. That would definitely be something I'd keep in mind for my next one though. Oh, and we can't forget about Darth Vader and Mando over there. As we force push our way down from there, you'll find my 17-inch variable speed drill press. Now, I'll be honest, this is one of my later purchases for the shop, mainly because I could get by with my benchtop model for quite a while. But this has been a welcomed addition to the shop because the additional power and flexibility of the variable speed adjustments have been stellar. I also added a tabletop and fence to help with repeatability and dust collection, because there are few tools that create as much airborne dust as the drill press. And this table is also nice because it features a small drawer that's handy for storing frequently used drill bits. One day soon, I may get around to organizing it. No promises though. Just below that, I have another scrap storage bin where I keep shorter but thicker hardwood offcuts. We've already discussed how woodworkers are notorious hoarders, and one way I try to combat that is by having specific storage areas for my lumber. Up and to the right, we have my finishing cabinet. This is where I store all my finishes and finishing accoutrements. It too is a recent addition to the shop and has been pretty handy in its short time here. And I designed the cabinet with sliding shelves to make accessing the rear portion of the storage easy. Finally, this cabinet sits above my router table, so it's high enough on the wall that I don't run into it while I'm working at the machine. And speaking of the router table, let's hop right in. My router table and lift are both from Woodpeckers, and I modified the lower portion to create some storage. The base plate leads to a small cabinet that connects to my larger dust collector, and it has a really solid adjustable fence that can accept different feeding attachments as well as a hose for a dust extractor. I have to say, I love how well those two features work together because the combination results in very little to no dust at all. The router itself is a spin right router, which is 3¼ horsepower and a variable speed unit with a ton of power. Again here, the machine rests on casters, so it's easy to move in and out as needed. And as far as storage goes, I think it's completely adequate for a small shop. There's plenty of space to store adjustment tools as well as bits, featherboards, and feed rollers. The last of my lumber storage rests just to the right where I store my larger sheet goods. In a small shop, it can be kind of a pain to get to the back, but that's just something you learn to live with. There are a few more odds and ends that I'd like to cover, one being my pretty janky air filtration. This is one of those upgrades that's on my list for this year, so stay tuned for that one. Often I get questions about my photography backdrops, so I figured it'd be a good idea to show you guys how I have those rolls stored. And again, I'll link these in the description for anyone who's interested. The final and quite possibly most important part of my shop is floor mats. They both save your work in the case where you drop something and you're back in the process. They'd probably be the first thing I'd recommend investing in for anyone who works on concrete flooring. So as we reach the end of our tour, I just want to say thank you again to you guys for watching and supporting the channel. It's because of viewers like you that I'm able to keep growing the shop and raising the stakes. So thank you for liking and sharing this video, and if you'd like to see these tools in action, check out this video next. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and as always, I knew this would work, and I'll see you next time.